change out you're putting in the trash can liner. Yeah, I actually did go out and buy the Nutella. It's there. So you're going to check your lid when you get home. So normally, I get to hang out with the youth group on Sunday morning. They're actually worshiping right now. Our student leaders are taking care of the service. We are very grateful for our volunteers. But I love Did You Knows, or I was today old when I figured out this bit of knowledge. If you find me scrolling my phone, a lot of times that's how they keep me scrolling longer, as they throw in one of those videos. I love them. We're going to do a couple of them today. But today I want you guys to know a little bit about the character of God, because the character of God is so important. When we read the Bible, a lot of times when we read the Bible, we read it a little bit of a self-help book. How do I fix me? Do you ever read the Bible as this is God's character, and this is what I should be looking forward to making my life look like? Do we look at the Bible as God's character? So last time I got to hang out with you, I talked about, I'm a contextual reader of the Bible. I love context. I want to know why things were happening. I want to know the history. I want to know the depth. And so I read the Bible based on context. I shared with you last time, for those of you who weren't here, the way I read the Bible is kind of like a painting. Context is important. It's kind of like a painting. And so if you take a football game, I'll get to both of you guys. I like visuals. I'm a visual guy. Youth pastor, young guy, I like visuals. I'm a visual learner. So if you go to a museum, you look at a painting from a distance, you can see, wow, that's really pretty art. You step closer, you read the little plaque on the side, you go, oh, that's the information, why, what medium they used, what was happening at the time that it was used. And then you step a little bit closer and you start to see the brush strokes and how they created the color and how they blended together to make what the artist made. And so I think that's the same thing with Scripture. As we step closer to the Bible, we see what God intended for us. As we step back, we see the beauty of how he did it. We see the history. Also, for football fans, it's like sitting in the nosebleed section versus being in the crazy fan section, and that, you know who you are, the crazy fan section, and then being a coach on the sideline or being an athlete on the field. You get to experience the game differently each time you step closer to the game, but you can appreciate the game altogether no matter where you're at. And so I believe that's the same way as we read the Bible. I love reading the Bible that way. But I left you a little bit short last time, and I apologize. I also believe that the Bible has depth to it. Knowledge, wisdom, or stupidity or foolishness. We have knowledge to do things. We can read the Bible. We can understand them. And then as things happen in our life, we get depth of understanding. As we become dads or moms, as we get our first job, as we get married, when we start experiencing things, all of a sudden we have depth to what God's trying to tell us. And so I'll give you a little bit of a story just to help prove that point as we get started. So my wife, her father did pass away a couple of months ago, a little over a year ago, actually. He's in heaven. We're going to see him again, but she's the executor of his will, and so she had to sell his car. So she drove to New York. I couldn't be with her. She has to sell a car. So she gets in the car, and she turns it over. It's a 2017 Jeep Grand Cherokee. She tries to turn it over. It won't start. It's been sitting in the garage too long. I don't know if you've ever had that problem. You just, it doesn't start. So she calls me. She has the knowledge of how to change a battery. You take one out, you put one in, it goes. Like, it's not, she assumed it was kind of like changing the battery in the kids' toys. It's like you pop one in, and so she calls me, she's like, I'm way in over my head, how do you do this? And so via FaceTime, I'm trying to teach my wife how to change a battery. And so she goes to the random toolbox, and I hear clanking around. She gets a wrench out, and she's like, this one fits! I have permission to tell the story. Sit down. All the moms are looking at me evil-eyed. I have permission. So she gets in there, and she's doing that, and then all of a sudden I hear clank, 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 clank. Don't get ahead of me. Uh-oh. I'm like, dropped the wrench, didn't you, babe? Because I'm sitting somewhere on the car looking at the hood at that point. And she's like, yep, and I don't know where another one is. And so I'm like, okay, just go home. She's staying with her sister. Borrow some tools from brother-in-law and come back in the morning, because it was late at night at that time, and change it. And so the girls come back tomorrow excited. We're going to do this. And I'm cheering my wife on. You can do this. I believe in you. And so they start working on it again, and lo and behold, clink, clink, clink. There was a mechanic somewhere that was like, dear God, I don't know if this is really my career. And then they open up the bottom of the street and tools just rain down on him. It was like, okay, God. And so there's a mechanic that heard the Lord that day. That's how I like to think about it. But anyway, so she's changing this battery and she gets it out and she's excited. I got a picture of her excitement. We got that? Yeah! I've changed the battery myself. And so I'm like, yeah, but you have 15 minutes to put the other battery back in before they come to hand you the check to take the car away. And she's like, oh yeah. So I'm real proud of her. I was excited that she was able to change the battery. Now she has depth of wisdom. She has knowledge, depth of wisdom of how to do it. But so depth of wisdom is equally as important as knowing the character of God. So she has depth, but she's not a mechanic. There is depth of wisdom, and mechanics have changed a lot. She can't change all the batteries in every car because they're different. They're in different places. You have to move different things around. She has some knowledge, but there's depth. And so I think it's important to understand as we get into today's message that there is wisdom, and to get aha moments, sometimes you just have to read the Bible and God will reveal himself to you. But then there's depth of wisdom as we get life experiences and understand the character of God. So depth of wisdom is equally as important to knowing the character to God. So I've got a couple of, so here's how it's going to work, because this is how my brain works and you guys are just going to have to keep up. So I'm going to give you a couple of did you know brain breaks, so some worldly ones, and then we're going to get into the Bible and do some did you know sections of the Bible and the character of the Bible. So, and I've got this fancy camera for people at home. I've got some smaller things. But moms and dads, I know there's a lot in there today. You know, back there was a lot of problems with kids getting juice boxes and then all over everything. You know what I'm talking about? Capri Suns haven't figured this out yet. I don't know why. But now with the juice boxes, these flaps here on the juice boxes, they're not necessarily just there for like looks and to close it. If your kids hold them by the flaps and you push it in, they don't squeeze it all over everything. Just open the flaps and make them carry it around with this. Fantastic, right? All right, let's see what else. A TV pilot is called a pilot because it's the first time on air. Makes sense, right? That's why they call it that. Any actors, like you've been to an acting, the reason why they say break a leg all the time, I always wonder that. I'm like, break a leg? That sounds awful. They can't act if they do that. The reason why they say break a leg is they want to see you in the cast. Oh, yeah, see? All right, see? You are getting my daily excitement of scrolling. All right, here's a fun one. Where did I do with my... I don't normally bring my phone up here, and I'm sure that all of you that have an iPhone are going to take it out right now and open a text to the person you love the most, okay? You can do it. And so I'm going to bring my camera over here. So do you know if you find and open a text, I got my wife, Amber, here. I'm going to send her a text. Do you know if you text them the word pew, P-E-W, P-E-W. Got to put a space in between. Pew, pew. All right? Yeah, Star Wars reference. There you go. If you do that and push send, it sends them a laser light show. There's a whole bunch of them, but Pew Pew sends them a laser light show. So we have conversations, and then I just send her Pew Pews. You guys are learning all kinds of things today. All right, so let's get into Scripture, because that's what we're here for. So over the last couple of years, I've been digging in the Bible. I've had those moments where I've been so blown away by the character of God. If you just pick a character of God and then start reading the Bible, you'll start seeing that characteristic of God throughout. If it's not throughout, then I don't think it's necessarily from God. I think God's character is consistent. So the one I want to talk about a little bit today, and Pastor Dirk and I didn't talk. We didn't have conversations, but last week he talked about some ways to get into the battles of life, get into the hardships of the world, and one of them he talked about is you got to open your word. And don't take Dwight's word for it, Pastor Mike, Mark, don't take our word for it. Open it for yourself. Enjoy God for yourself. One of the ways we have aha moments comes through exploring God's through his word. And so it's a lot of fun. And if you see this different characteristics flowing through God, you'll start seeing God himself. And so I want to share real quick with you the did you know. I was at Tony Shetter's biblical warfare class. Some of you guys went to that class. It was a fantastic class. And all of a sudden, he talked about this characteristic. And I put this to the test. He mentioned it to me. The characteristic of God's continual cycle of how he deals with us in our rebellion. And so he said, listen, God loves us. He created us beautiful, wonderful, perfect, with a passion, desire. He created his good. We were good at the beginning. And then we broke it. And then God steps in and intervenes and wants to redeem us. So he gives us a period of grace and mercy. And then his wrath does come. If you read throughout the Bible, everybody wants to leave the wrath part out, but his wrath comes. And so I know there's a lot of parents in here right now. It's kind of, we know this. And if you've been a child, you know this too. God's consistency, we do this as parents as well. Moms and dads, you ever have like the mess? You know, oh, we love our kids. They're perfect. They're amazing. And then they create a mess and you go, hey, listen, get over here and clean up this mess, or clean up your plate, or do this, or, we have something we need them to do because they've messed it up. And we go, come here. And they look at you like you've got 8 heads. And I don't know why they do that. And then what do we innately do almost immediately afterwards? 1, get over here and clean this mess up. 2, like we start counting for some reason. I'm not sure why that. And then eventually, I do it too. You all done it. At least had a parent do it to you. We start counting. I have kids that I have one that you don't need to count. Like she's so terrified to be like, there's a mess. Oh no. Like that's just her personality. I've got the one that's like stops at everything on the way just before 3 and is like, oh yeah, this. That's just their nature. And I've got the one that goes, if I can't hear you counting, you're not really counting. So I've got those children, and so parenting is different. And so that's the same way with God. God's consistency of God created it, we messed it up. He gives us grace and mercy and a chance to fix it and some instruction to fix it, and then his wrath eventually comes. Eventually there's the one kid that's like, no, time out. And that's how God deals with us. And you're laughing because you know it's true. God is consistent through the Old Testament and the New Testament. So God is consistent through the Old Testament and New Testament. I believe the Old Testament, and one of the reasons why it's there is it's a mirror to who we are. When we're in charge of things, we keep messing things up. We mess things up a lot. And so when we're in front of that mirror, we can look at the Old Testament. It's so important to understand when we're in charge of the cleanup, we seem to get it wrong over and over again. And then the New Testament comes and God steps in that and he gets rid of those things that he takes charge and he says, I'm going to fix this. And so let's look at that for the rest of our time together. In Tony's class, he mentioned the fact that Noah, a lot of us know the story. God said, hey, my world is just so broken and I'm so sad that I created them. And so, Noah, I need you, you are one of my faithful. I need you to build a boat, and anybody who gets on the boat lives, and anybody who does not dies. And there is a gap of 120 years to build the boat. I get to 3 and I'm ready to lose my mind. God gets to 120 years before his wrath comes, and only 8 people get on the boat. But his wrath does come. Here's the did you know of that story that Tony shared with us, and I was like, oh, interesting. Do you guys know the word rainbow? We look at the rainbow and we're like, oh, it's beautiful, and we take 80 pictures. But the rainbow, the translation of the word is actually the weapon of war, a bow and arrow, a weapon of war. God literally hung his weapon of war up on the mantelpiece and said, I'm not going to use it. It's like grandpa's gun. Like, I'm not going to use that again. But man, you remember what I did with that? Oh, you guys know the grandpa that tells the stories. Yeah, all right, I got one of those too. So he hung it up and he said, I'm not going to use, do you look at a rainbow as like, it's so beautiful, or do you look at it slightly in fear going, man, God had a lot of power over us and he will not use it again on us. I'm like, whoo, man. As a parent, I'm like, I hope taking away punishments, I'm like, oh, I guess I won't give you a timeout anymore. That's what God, he removed one of his punishments. So brain break real quick, just in case you guys need one so that it can all sink in. A couple more did you knows. So my daughter Selah came to me. She's learning to read. She's got the phonetic writing right now. So like you're reading it and you're like, that makes no sense. That's gibberish. But if you sound it out, it actually makes sense. And you're like, oh, that's so sweet. All right. So she's a phonetic drawer or writer right now. And she goes, Dad, how do you know when to use a C and a K? And why would they put two sounding letters the same in the alphabet? That's stupid. And I'm like, you're right, but there's a way to figure it out. It's an easy way that I didn't know, and I'm like, oh, did you know? This is amazing. All right, so camera guy, come on, hang out with me so they can see this. All right, so C. Oh, that's a terrible C. We'll get rid of that. All right, C, we'll go with that. All right, we'll put some ears on that C. We'll give that C some whiskers. We'll put some A's here and some U's and an O. That cat's really surprised at a dog's coming. And then the K. And we'll just make a K-I-T-E. See what I did there? So anytime it is followed by an A, a U, or an O, it's C. Anytime it's followed by an I or an E, it's a K. I had teachers afterwards going, where was that when I was teaching? So there you go. Now you know the difference. What are some of the other fun ones? Oh, do you guys know that the word stressed is just dessert backwards? No wonder why we eat when we're stressed. Boom. You know when somebody says to hold your horses? They're just asking you to be stable for a little bit. All right? Here's some other. I'm not starting a cooking show up here. So when you tell your wife, hold your horse, don't tell your wife, hold your horse. So here's another one. Do you guys know, like, some of you guys are all rich and you got the, like, hangy fancy things where you, like, put this up in the, most of us just have, like, the oven to stick it in, all right? Do you know that that little hook is made that way so you can just put that in there and you don't have, like, a drippy. Some of you guys are stove people. You're like, oh, put it on the stove. I'll wipe it later. In fact, you know that, like, oh, let me take that out for a second. That's why they've got these raised. They're higher than the edge so that you can do that with the handles too. Amazing. All right, so, and then the Colander Trick. These were designed to go in the pot, and then you go to the stove and dump like this. You actually press some of the water out of the noodles, and if you serve it right away, they don't stick together. But if you don't serve it right away, you've got to wash the noodles first, or they will stick together. Ooh, starch. So tape measures, I got one more. Tape measures, so camera guy, come on in. Anybody know why the tape measures arc like this besides structurally? It's so that you can see it from you can see your numbers from any angle, no matter if you're like hanging off a ladder. So that's one of the reasons. Also, like, there's red numbers right now. My wife's like, why is there red numbers on there? So there's 16, 32, all that. That's so that if you find one stud, every 16 inches, there's supposed to be another stud. And my wife told me not to do the stud joke, but there you go. Anyway. Sorry, dear. Also, there's like a gap. Some people are like, oh, my tape measure's broken. This part's all wiggly. It's got a gap there because if you were to wedge it in between a piece of wood, you lose the 1/16 of the width of this little metal piece. And so they want a true zero so you don't cut it short. And so that's why that little wiggle's there, so that you can wedge it in there and take away 1/16. There's more like, the end of it. The end of it is so that if you're working alone and you do find that stud, you just hook it, the nail or the screw edge right in there, and then you have something holding your tape measure for you. You can do it by yourself. So there you go. Did you know? So you guys are all smarter or dumber. I don't know. Because now you're going to go home and be like, I need to scroll these things, and that will make you, I don't know, smarter. Maybe. We'll go with that. So there you go. Did you know? Let's get back in the Bible. Remember, characteristic of God. That's what we're trying to get across with some did you knows in there. In July, I went to the Creation Museum. Had a ton of fun at the Creation Museum. If you've ever been there, it's fantastic. I kind of went because I've been there before and I thought everything was going to be the same. And so as I'm at the Creation Museum, making sure that the teens aren't purpling, which if you don't know, blue and pink together make purple. And so that's my job. I make sure they don't purple when a mommy and a daddy love each other. Anyway, not today's message. So I'm at the Creation Museum. I'm going through, I'm looking at things, and then I kind of pass, oh, that one's nice. Yep, seen that. I was getting kind of smug. And then I get to one, and I'm like, beep, beep. Like, I totally blew my mind. I'm like, no way, God, you're awesome. And it proved the point we're talking today. So that's what we're talking about. So this is the picture of what I saw. Its title is Yahweh and the Egyptian Gods. And so a lot of us know that Pharaoh, let my people go. Yes, you know the song and you know the story. So Moses is commanded. And so here's, my people were bad. I need you, Moses, to go in and redeem them and tell Pharaoh to let my people go. And so let's go through our God made it. God said to do something, or wrath will come. And so he goes to Pharaoh, and he goes, Pharaoh, listen, I need you to let my people go. And what does he say? No. So the first thing he says is no, and he says, listen, this is the timeout. You do this, or I'm giving you this timeout. And so Moses goes back and says, hey, listen, first plague, he goes, listen, I need you to let my people go. And he says no. And so what does he do first? The first plague. It is water. He says, I'm going to turn the water to blood, and all the fish in the water will die. The crazy part about this story is Egypt had gods that they worshiped. And they had like 7 really specific gods and a lot of smaller ones. So the first god we're going to talk about is Hapti or Hatmet. It's the fish god of the Nile. And so God says, listen, let my people go, or else you're not going to like it. I'm going to send blood. And what did he kill first? Was the fish of the Nile. I'm better than your God. And so what does he do next? God really doesn't like, that's a whole nother sermon. God does not like when other people put God in front of him. And so the next one he does, he says, let my people go. And so what does he do next? He sends frogs and they all die. Hecht, frog-headed goddess of fertility. So he sends the frog-headed goddess and they all die too. And he says, I am better than that God too. Are you listening yet? And so then he sends 2 more, and I purposely in your outline, I left those blank because there's a response that happens. First, he sends gnats or lice in the plague 3. He's like, I'm going to send gnats and lice. And he says, let my people go. And Moses said, let me go out and worship. And so he says no again. And so God sends flies in the 3rd plague. And then here's how cool God is. He's like, just so that you know that this isn't like some random coincidence that I'm showing up your gods, it only affected the people of Egypt. It did not affect the people of Israel that avoided them. And so he's like, are you listening yet? And Pharaoh says, no. I don't know if you have that defiant kid. I have that from time to time, but no. And so now, and this is patience of God. He wants to redeem Israel. He wants his people back, and yet Pharaoh is not listening. So the next one, Hathor, the cow-headed goddess of love. And so what plague did he send next? He kills all the livestock. The 5th plague is the death of livestock. And so then he moves on, and Pharaoh says no yet again. Boy, God is pretty patient with Pharaoh, isn't he? Did he deserve it? No. If you understand the history, if you take somebody's kid back then, it was a capital offense. And God even talked to Pharaoh and said, listen, you have taken my firstborn. I want it back. And so he continues on. The next plague is Imhotep, god of healing. You ever watch the movie Mummy? They talk about Imhotep and what happens. They get boils in the movie. They got it right in the movies. Imhotep, the god of healing. And so he sends boils next. So I'm giving you guys time to write too. Senheim, the locust-headed god of the harvest, is next. And so what does he do to just show that God is in control? Oh, excuse me, I did miss 7, but that's 8. The locust-headed god destroys all of their crops. Let me step back into 7. God says, hey, listen, I'm going to send hail and I'm going to eradicate everything that's outside. And a couple of Pharaoh's leaders actually went and brought everything inside. And so there was a response from some of his leaders, but not all of them. And so he keeps sending plague. We get to number 9. We have the Amon-Ra, the god of the sun. So what does God do? He sends darkness for 3 days. Again, we can point back to God's consistency and how it connects all the way until he's in the tomb for 3 days. We can do all of that with the Bible. And then finally, Pharaoh's heart was so hardened. Pharaoh and his son Isis were worshipped as the sun prophets, but Pharaoh and his sons Isis were worshipped as the son of the sun gods, protector of the children. And God looked at Pharaoh and said, I am even better than you. Let my people go. And it was then that Pharaoh let his people go, but his heart hardened and he chased after them. Eventually, God's wrath came. And we know the rest of the story. The Red Sea closed in on them. And so, again, that consistency of who God is showing Pharaoh grace and mercy. And he showed wrath when they finally wouldn't listen. We can go throughout the Bible, Jonah and the whale. It ended great for Nineveh. We can do Sodom and Gomorrah. Please go find a bunch of guys. Go find 10 guys. Find one guy. Couldn't find a follower of God. And God wanted to stop his wrath from coming, but nobody was listening. Even on the way out, he gave a command. Listen, when you leave the city, don't turn around. And what does Lot's wife do? She reaps his wrath because she didn't honor and listen to God. She turned around and turned into a pillar of salt. God is consistent with who he is throughout the Old Testament and when we're in control. A few weeks back, I was talking to a friend. I'm going to do one more because I could go on and on through the Bible, but I love how it just speaks to you. I love how reading and understanding God is critical to who you are and the depth that you grow as you read the Bible and the understanding of who God created you to be and who he is. So I was talking to a friend. I love having these did you know conversations. In fact, after the last service, there was a bunch of people like, did you know? I'm like, yes, this is awesome. Keep them coming. Elijah was, story of Elijah, he does this like God off with the leaders of Baal. God's people have started worshiping Baal. And so he says, listen, I'm going to present myself, I'm going to show up, and we're going to have a God off. And so he finds 450 of their leaders, and he is the lone prophet left. And he says this. Let's go through this story real quick. I like reading from the Bible on this one. Then Elijah said to them, I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Get 2 bulls for us. Let Baal's prophets choose one for themselves, and let them cut it into pieces and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. I will prepare one of the other bulls and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord, the God who answers by fire. He is God. Then all the people said, what you say is good. They're like, yeah, let's do this. Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose one of the bulls and prepare it first, since there are many of you. Call on the name of your God, but do not light the fire. So they took the bull and bull given and prepared it. Then they called on the name of Baal from morning till noon. Baal, answer us, they shouted, but there was no response. No one answered, and they danced around the altar that they had made. And I love this part because he gets a little cocky here. At noon, Elijah begins to taunt them. Shout louder, he says. Surely he is a god. Perhaps he's deep in thought or busy or traveling. Maybe he's sleeping and must be wakened. Like, I love that. Like, I know who the real God is. Now, remember what we're talking about. Let my people go. I want Israel to follow God. I want you guys to stop worshiping Baal. And then what does he do? He asks the people around him, fill up these 4 massive jugs. He builds a trench around his altar. They fill 4 jugs. They pour it on. They get the entire sacrifice completely soaking wet. And then he asks them to do it 2 more times. What we don't realize is what is the one thing they didn't have much of? Water. If you read verse 1, they were in a severe drought for nearly 3 years. It's kind of like this picture. I have a picture of Jesus going, listen, I want what is good for you. I have something amazing for you, but I need you to give up. I need you to trust me in this. I will give you good if you will come fix this mess up you have. And so God is consistent in giving grace and mercy. Have aha moments with the scripture because ultimately God's people followed him and they gave up the water. And God, what does he do next? It rained for the first time in 3 years in abundance, and water was restored to them, and his people worshiped him again. God's character is to restore and grow a relationship with you. Maybe you're today old when you realize that. Maybe some of you guys can remember the day you made a realization that God wants to restore and have a relationship with you regularly. Maybe you're in the season of life where you're doing really well with that, but you need a kind of a kick in the pants. Do you know that Jesus was a fantastic youth pastor? Let that sink in for a second. So there's this great story. People are like, well, how do you know? So there's a great story. Jesus is getting ready to teach a parable, and he goes, listen, they go into a town, and you're supposed to pay a temple tax. And Jesus says, hey, listen, I'm going to go in this building, and somebody comes to Peter and says, hey, why doesn't your teacher pay the temple tax? Does he not? God gives a little bit of a parable, and he says, yes, we do. And so he says this back to Peter. But so we may not cause offense, go to the lake and throw out your line. Take the first fish you catch, open its mouth, and you'll find 4 drachma coin. Take it and give it to them for my tax and yours. You had to pay this tax when you turned 20 years old, which means he only paid for himself and Peter. All the disciples were free. It's kind of like going to the buffet. It's like, woohoo, kids eat free. The disciples were most likely under that age, teenagers, young men, and so I like to joke he was a great youth pastor. In fact, there's this other story in the Bible where Jesus sits down with those young men around food, which is totally a youth pastor move. They're celebrating the Passover. Remember that Moses story where God says, hey, in the 10th one, if you put blood of a pure lamb above your door, I will protect you. See where we're going? It's throughout the entire Bible. And so now we have this New Testament story where they're sitting down around a meal. Followers of Jesus know, and you and I know it as the Lord's Supper. For those around the table, they had no idea that God was revealing his salvational intention. He was giving us a way to remember his sacrifice that he was about to partake. It wouldn't be until later that they had their aha moments as to the significance of what was happening. No more lambs or burnt offerings, no more judges or rulers to redeem them. God was doing it for us in the place of all of those for all time. God is consistent. You know, in the Bible, we at Easter time, we hear the story of Jesus praying the prayer, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And a lot of people misconstrue that only as the fact that he's talking to the Roman soldiers. Father, forgive them, they're just doing their job. He's also praying to God to have him remember that his wrath doesn't need to be right now. That we need a period of grace and mercy to come to the Lamb, the sacrificial Lamb that he was going to become. We, you and I, live in a period of grace and mercy. And no, it was 120 years. In Pharaoh's time, it was the 10 plagues. Throughout all history, you and I are living in God's grace and mercy. And then he did this amazing thing to help us remember the fact that God's wrath is coming for those who do not believe in him. So if you have your elements, please take them out. God is consistent. So he sat around the table not knowing that an aha moment was being planted for all humanity. We get to share in that. And as you take your bread and your elements, realize that this is a really cool aha moment, that God loves you so much. He took the bread and he broke it and he gave thanks for it. And then he instructed them to take and eat. And he said, this is my body broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Then he had them take the wine after supper, and he said to them, take and drink. This is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink of it in remembrance of me. This is the most beautiful aha moment you can have in your entire life. To know that God loves you, that he wants a relationship with you into eternity. He doesn't want to be a wrathful father. He doesn't want what is bad for you. He loves you. And he's willing to have his body broken and his blood poured out for you in that place, in your place. I encourage anyone who has not had that aha moment. We have people that come up to the front after the service and will pray with you if you've got prayers, or if you want to accept Jesus and know him more, and to have a lifetime of aha moments into eternity. We encourage you to do that. If you've made that decision, we have September 11th baptism. That's the next step. Make a decision to follow Jesus and then go public with your faith. Join a community of people and believers. Be held accountable. Live in grace and mercy together. Serve. Join worship teams, tech teams, youth ministry. We can always use people to serve. And get to know God of the universe deeply, because he died on a cross. His consistency for you has been since the beginning. He's been chasing after humanity. He wants his people just to love him as much as he loves you. The character of God doesn't change. Are you having aha moments with him?